All right, we're back once again here with Leo Rappaport of Chicago. And this time I was thinking we would discuss, it's already the next week after Parshas Devarim, it's already the week of Parshas Va'aschan and Tisha B'Av, but it's behamshich to the Chassidus, Likutei Torah, bemishpat, tipadeh, shvuyim, tzedakah, which is a theme that's certainly relevant throughout the 9 days. I think with the Rebbe, it's a pasuk and a mimer that was emphasized a lot, discussed a lot, so it's certainly still applicable, still relevant. So this is something that caught my eye looking at the Torah past Friday, Shabbos. I was asked to speak about it a little bit, and I shared my thoughts b'kitzer, but I thought it'd be nice to share, to elaborate a bit, to flesh it out here on here in this format. You familiar with the mimer? You took a look at the mimer?
I did not yet look at the mimer, certainly not this year, no.
I shouldn't have put you on the spot like that. It's a very touchy subject. Every chassid, nothing to do with you. I'm saying b'chaskas, the Chassidus Parsha, but like to ask someone if they learned it though is a risky question.
We've discussed in the past the contribution that you could make toward making the Chassidus Parsha accessible to everyone. So, kana mokim le'orer, that you should make a regular weekly share on the Parsha, in the Chassidus Parsha of the week, and many people would benefit from it.
I'd love to do something like that. We still have to find the right format for that, whether a regular, traditional, standard share in a particular location. If anyone's interested, it's always open to ideas, to possibilities, or whether to take the route of the world we live in today to create some kind of course. We'll have to see how that turns out. By the way, we're doing this, I think, for the first time at night. We're recording this at night. So whether or not that has any impact on the visuals of this for those watching, or on either of us falls asleep in the middle, you'll know why. We're after a very long day of Torah v'Avodah. And while I'm at it, while I'm talking about the technical matters, be merirus the olam, to please like the video, subscribe, etc. It's hard for me to ask for such pashat zachen, but I'm sure the olam will be happy to how do they say it in Yiddish? Beisteuern, to contribute their likes and their shares. Okay, so it's an interesting mimer. Let's jump into it. It's an interesting mimer. I don't know. I'm actually curious how many people learn it. Whether it's considered. Sometimes I ask myself, is this particular mimer in the Likutei Torah? Is this a famous one? Is this a more obscure one? How many people actually learn it in the Pnim? I don't have any particular memories of it being taught or it being learned or discussed. Now the Rebbe has a bunch of mamarim on Tzion bemishpat tipadeh, and I imagine it's probably more common. People in yeshiva probably learn one or more, a couple of them. And they're all, as far as I saw, they're all based pretty much on this mimer. There aren't that many mamarim of the Rebbeim on Tzion bemishpat tipadeh. It's an interesting example of where the Rebbe is taking a mimer essentially from the Likutei Torah and emphasizing it. Just like the most famous example probably is Anila Deidu Deidili, Malach Basada, where if you look at all the Mamorim in the interim from other Rebbeim, it wasn't Teufus as a Chashav Makim, and the Rebbe makes it the mimer of Elul. So maybe B'Zer Rampen, B'Dugma Lazah, you could say with Tzion bemishpat tipadeh, where prior to you look, there's a Haggais from the Tzemach Tzedek, there's another Hanacha from the Tzemach Tzedek, but it's not a mimer that all the Rebbeim were basing their Mamarim on and Kachen Zich in, but the Rebbe does, looks like in Tafshin Lamed, from what I could tell, looks like the Rebbe Pashat more or less Chazer the mimer with Ha'aris. We know many times the Rebbe essentially Chazer his early Mamarim with Ha'aris, and there are other Mamarim as well that are maybe you could say are based on it rather than just Chazering it, but in some Harmuga you have Mamarim Malukot, you have a number of Mamarim but as far as I saw, they're all based on this mimer Likutei Torah.
You're actually touching on something which I don't know if now is the right time to get into this, but it's something that recently I have articulated to myself more and more. At Tzion, the Rebbe's Nigla, and in the Rebbe's Chassidus, and the Rebbe Torah is constantly being published and republished with all sorts of different formats and chidushim and then different pitchufkis. But it seems to me that it's yet to be done. Again, saying the Rebbe's Maimorim and in Zichas or whatever, to be able to see clearly what's the Rebbe chazing from before, what are the Yesodus, what's the Rebbe adding, is the Rebbe just chazing a Maimer in his signan, is the Rebbe, and also in Nigla, in a Rashi Sicha, like it would be, to me, like it would be really nice to present the Rebbe's Nigla Sichas as just like as a shir in the Sugya, was steht in Gemara, was steht in whatever it is, was sagen the Rishonim, and then now here's the Rebbe's contribution to the Sugya, and I feel like if you want to do that in the Rebbe's Torah, again, sign the Nigla and sign Chassidus, the work's all on you. It hasn't, as far as I can tell, nobody's done that to any segment of the Rebbe's Torah in a systematic way.
Right. I can't comment on who has done what per se. Nothing comes immediately to mind one way or the other. But I definitely agree with you that I think there's a big chesaron. If we can offer a word of bikoros very carefully, very edel, that, in my opinion, there's a big koch learning the Rebbe's Sichos, learning the Rebbe's Maimorim. But I think the nature of Chassidus Bechlal, to a certain extent, is lahavdil. There's a famous word in the Welt of that everything is footnotes to Plato, or something like that, where the Chacham Akademin was Machadish all the Yesodus, and everything that comes afterwards is footnotes, is ha'aris. So certainly in Teres Chabad, you could say b'dugma lezeh lahavdil, everything is footnotes to the Alter Rebbe, one way or another. And I think if you actually pay attention, you'll see that the Rebbe very much treats it that way. And speaking now of Torah, the way the Rebbe emphasized many, many times that it all comes back to Likutei Torah, it comes down to Likutei Torah. And let's say take a marma like this: you want to learn the Rebbe's marma, Tzion bemishpat tipadeh, but definitely the Mamorim in Malukot and probably Bechlal, they're all the Rebbe is sort of assuming you have familiarity with the original, and the Rebbe is coming to add a word here, to add a knetch here, to be mevayer a certain prat, to clarify a prat. So it's hard. I mean, it's not really just connected to the Rebbe's Torah. Like if you are in yeshiva and you learn halacha and you start from Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it's similar in a certain way where you're starting in the middle of a story, you're starting in the middle of a parsha. So yes, if you're an intelligent person, you can make a laning and feel that you're following more or less, but you are missing a lot of context. And just like the Alter Rebbe in halacha is, if you actually look at the Gemara and the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, you would see that the Alter Rebbe is adding a knetch, the Alter Rebbe is emphasizing something, the Alter Rebbe is merging something, the Alter Rebbe is omitting something. And if you just read it straight without the context, so like I said, you feel like you're following, but you're actually missing a lot of what makes it meaningful. So, in my opinion, especially look at the way the Rebbe set his Maimorim up, full of footnotes, and the footnote will say miyused on this, based on the Rebbe will start off and say or there's a question in Mamar Rebbe saying Yisienu, then there'll be a footnote that will say which one the Rebbe means. So along those lines, it would make more sense. And I think if you want to comment it from the direction that the Rebbe is coming from, the Rebbe, before he said the Maimer, he looked at the Likutei Torah. So you want to follow in the same track as the Rebbe, path as the Rebbe. First you look at the Likutei Torah, first you look at the source, and then you can appreciate what the Rebbe is coming to add, what the additional kvetch or knetch or major chedushim, or whatever the case may be. But even if you're looking for the Rebbe's major chedushim, you're not really going to be able to determine what they are and appreciate them without the context. And I think that's a step that many people skip. Like I said, it's not just a Rebbe thing; it's like a yeshivish thing. It seems like in the Olam HaYeshivas, it's just a tendency to not learn things grundlich, and to learn things al the way you describe. But there's no mucker, there's no reason. There's no good reason to do that way, and it's definitely something that is ripe for a change, for an improvement. In my opinion, I imagine you agree. To learn something b'seder mesuder, and there are enough merirus and chassidus about the inyan of seder and being mesuder, and that applies to learning as well, learning by Eifin B'Suder, and not to just, I don't know if chap malachim is the right expression here, but there's a certain tzad hashava where you're just sort of leaping into the air and grabbing ideas out of the air without approaching it more systematically. And I think what the whole point of the Rebbe's footnotes. Why is the Rebbe writing all these footnotes? What's the Rebbe spent? How many hours? What percentage of the Rebbe's life was spent writing footnotes, working on footnotes, getting the footnotes right? What's the point of footnotes? Just to fill half the page, to impress people? The way I would interpret it is that it's trying to convey a yesod that you have to broaden your horizons. And when the sikha would be without the footnotes, then you would be excused for thinking that it's a self-contained unit that came down as Zayman Hashemayim. When you have 50 or 100 footnotes, the whole point is to tell you that this sikha is coming after 100 sources that came before it. You have time to look at all 100 sources? No, so that's why we need someone to go through it, to make a seder, like you said.
There's a Savyad that goes around in the groups from time to time, something along the lines of to learn the Sichas like you learn the Minchas Chinuch or something along. Do you recall something?
I don't remember the specific one.
Something, whatever. But with Chassidus, it's not the same. But certainly, to learn all the Rebbe Tzion's bemishpat tipadeh are clearly a commentary on the Maimer L'Kutei Torah. Sometimes it may be straight up the Rebbe chazaving the Maimer, and sometimes it might be with more of kav shaloi, whatever you want to call it, of the Rebbe surface. But I guess it would be nice if they could be published in a way that makes that obvious, or even bolden the words, just to see what's what, or whatever. There's probably some more thought to be put into exactly what would be the best way to do it. But,
to put it a little sharp, the amount of times that the Rebbe's sichos have been rewritten and rewritten again, and this signon and that signon, in a hair. How many signoinas can you apply to the same text? The text is more or less what it is, as opposed to something like this, which is you could apply derech ktara v'aruka versus derech aruka ktara. Derech ktara v'aruka is okay. Rewrite it again. That's a derech ktara, but then it's a derech aruka because it's still very hard to get to the point, to what the Indian actually is. I think the derech aruka ktara would be, like you say, to take the time to look up the merirus, be mesader the merirus, be mesader it in Eifin B'Suder, and then would be derech aruka ktara. Then would be the path to actually, like I said, seeing things the way the Rebbe sees it, coming from where the Rebbe is coming from. I think that would be derech ktara. The result would be ktara. That's, as they say, zurak dati. That's my opinion. But of course, I think we try to say it in edel eifin. If anyone wants to hear it gesagt more sharp, I'm sure we can arrange it.
Maybe we could publish afterwards bloopers where we say things.
Right.
Let's start.
That's for the premium. That's for the premium members. Yeah.
Like you have to start the page where people could contribute towards the cause, and then can make members and premium members.
100%. 100%. Okay, so let's. It is late. We don't have as much time, so let's talk. Jump into it a bit. So, like I said, I don't remember how often people actually look at the original, and I can go off into another lecture about how people, those that do try to learn the Chiddush Parsha and do try to learn the Kutei Torah, and how they go about that, and how far they ever get into any particular mimer, never mind into a particular week. So I'll say it bekitzer right now, which is that part of what I think is very important, would be a very important contribution, which I try to do myself, is to look on a mimer, look at a week, and try to identify what are the key passages. What makes this mimer notable? What makes this mimer famous? There are a lot of times where a mimer in Kutei Torah starts off with like a very similar beginning of person has to be misblated in this and be misblated in that, and without getting into that whole discussion as to the repetition or the hisbaitinus and that whole discourse. But often, what makes a mimer interesting, unique? What's the major takeaway? It might not be a nice aleph. It might be a nice gimel. Like in this case, I want to focus. Taka. This is one of the shorter ones in the Torah. When you have a short one, it's either from the beginning of the Alter Rebbe's years, or sometimes it could be from the end of the Alter Rebbe's years. This actually seems to be from the later ones. But I think the other Hanacha is printed in Tafkuf Ayin Aleph. And that's its own sugya. What exactly happened there in the last year or so? It seems like Alter Rebbe was memayit in saying Derushim, or was mekatzer. Not fully clear to me exactly what happened there in those last years. But often we find shorter Rishimus. So in this case, 3 oisius in the Torah, that's after the Tzemach Tzedek Seisafis, L'fiyarech, it's a shorter Derush, a shorter Torah. And so, and in this case, the Ois Gimel is really what I want to. First of all, if you look at the Maimon, you'll see the whole Dibber Maskal, Tzim Mishpat tipadeh only really kicks in on Ois Gimel. And specifically, what I want to call attention to is an Ois Gimel. So, like I was saying, I think it's this would be an example where you look at the Maimon, you're going to sit down Shabbos morning at hopefully at 9 o'clock and not 11 o'clock. And like you're going to start reading it slowly, and you'll get through Ois Aleph, and maybe you'll even get through Ois Beis, and then you'll close the sefer and you'll be in your merry way. You never even got to the punchline. So I think would be a big major contribution to create some kind of whatever it is. Again, is it a sheet? Is it a course? Is it a class? Whatever the right format is, to try to train ourselves in how to get more meaning and more mileage out of our learning, specifically out of learning. So this is an example of that. So like I said, it's both coming from the angle of to really understand and appreciate what the Rebbe is talking about, to look at the original, and also specifically coming from the angle of, if you're already trying to learn Chassidus Parsha, to try to highlight in the Maimer Gufa, try to highlight the passages that are notable, that are interesting, that are often the ones that are notable are the ones that are interesting, and vice versa. So, in this case, though, it's a bit of a I don't know, twist is the right word, but here I want to focus on Ois Gimel, and I don't know if I have to sort of explain what we're talking about. Can't keep on saying Ois Beis, Ois Gimel without explaining what the Maimer is talking about. But Ois Gimel talks about the pasuk Tzim Mishpat tipadeh, V'shavah b'tzedakah, which is sort of the main takeaway, the point of the Maimon Dibra Maschal and the Rebbe's Ramarim focus on that. But in that gufa, the definition of V'shaveha, what the galus is and what the shavah is, even in the Rebbe's Ramarim, that's not a detail that the Rebbe focuses on so much. The Rebbe tends to focus on explaining other details. But looking directly at the Maimer, at the Alter Rebbe's Lashon, I thought there's a very good shmaka line. And I even search through. Go to Eitzer Chachmi, you can go to Sifriyat Chabad and search a certain quote, a certain lashon, to see how much it's quoted, how much it's discussed, how much it's paraphrased. And this grada was not, you don't see this aspect of it being quoted and discussed so much, but I think it's actually very interesting, very geschmack. So in this case, calling attention to a bit of an overlooked aspect of what should be more famous. So the structure of this Maimer is interesting. I don't know if cute is the appropriate word here, but starts off Tzim Mishpat tipadeh, and then the Maimer jumps into Lahaktim, or whatever exact word of introduction is, and jumps into Neshama, Yirid al-Tzerech Aliyah, which many Maimarim tend to do. And then it just goes off into the Derech and Avodas Hashem, if you can call it that the Alter Rebbe talks about in different variations. The person is connecting to the Eibishter like this, and being Osbein and that. A lot of the usual inyanim that you tend to see. And goes through Ois Aleph and Ois Beis like this. And towards the end of Ois Beis, I have a paper here. I printed out just the key text to have it in front of me, so I will refer to it a little bit, although we're not doing a shir here or reading a taiching, but we will refer to it. And so towards the end of Ois Beis, there's a reference there about there should be Gilul Likos in the Shnei Chalalei Libcha Chalal Hasmali. Shnei Chalalei Libcha. So Chalal Hasmali is merirus al shehu meshukum min yoylam haza b'richukim min Hashem. Chalal Yemini is Simcha Shemitz, which is also a pretty common idea that there's merirus on the one hand, Mesit Reda, Simcha, Mesit Reda. again, seems relatively conventional stuff. Obviously, even the conventional stuff can use discussing, but that's not what we're focusing on here. So that's all. Like I said, that's all conventional. The kicker is really Eis Gimel. That's where we return to the Dibra Maskell, and that's what you could say Mekenzag, what makes this Maimer notable and interesting. Eis Gimel begins, Ach kol zehu kefi shetzarech liyas, which itself I think is like a Geschmacka line. Sometimes I like to detect the original Yiddish in the Hebrew, because we know it was said in Yiddish and translated into Hebrew, and sometimes the sentence structure, the syntax reminds you of the Yiddish. Kol zehu kefi shetzarech liyas sounds a little bit like das ist als, darf zu sein. But it sounds like very Geschmack. How many Mamorim do that, where it's like the whole Maimer is like, builds up and but das ist als kefi shetzarech liyas. That itself I thought was a Geschmacka line, beginning of an ois. Should be more notable, more memorable. So it says, Alok she'enikein, when it says, nicht azoi, and the merirus is not from the fact that he's meshukah b'nyan olam haza, like he said in the end of the previous ois, but rather it is from the nyan olam haza themselves. That's what is distressing him. And the same goes for the simcha. The simcha, instead of being the simcha shal mitzvah, etc., is the simcha from Yoni Gashmias. So that's the golus of the Untitled Chapter and the Nefesh HaBahamis, and that's Tzion bemishpat tipadeh. Teaches the word Tzion, and that's a lot of where the Rebbe's discussion comes in here. I think is in some of the I don't know if technical is the right word, but the Hagdaras, especially the chiluk between Tzion bemishpat tipadeh, which the Alter Rebbe says this Tzion, this Untitled Chapter, is in golus and it also needs to be redeemed. But there's a distinction here between that with the nefesh kiss is in galus, but it's not from the shvuyim. And later he's going to say the shvuyim, the shivya, that's the chalalei alev, they're shvuyim mamish. So I think from looking at the Rebbe's Mamorim, it seemed like a lot of the discussion focuses on that, which inyan could be shvuyim, which inyan can't be shvuyim. I think in the one from Tav Shalom and Hey, the Rebbe says it's not just it's like a sort of a framework that could be applied to other things. So, for example, the Rebbe says tzaddikim versus bali tshuva. Tzaddikim are like the nefesh alikis. They could be in a need of pidyon, but they're never shvuyim. Versus those that are in a matzav bali tshuva, they could be shvuyim mamish. So that framework tends to get more of the attention. And even in the original, you could see the Alter Rebbe that's definitely part of the structure here. Is that the Alter Rebbe is drawing certain distinctions between the lashon of Tzion versus V'shavah, and the mishpat versus staka. That's not what I want to focus on right here. But so there's this idea that the nitzitz is in galus, v'gam hi begalus, and so that is with tipadeh bemishpat, etc. I'm jumping here a bit, and then comes the line that really caught me. It says V'shavah. I didn't even look up the pasuk and Mefarshim because the grammatical form shaveha. I wonder if everyone is even masking that it's meloshin shvi and shvuyim. Because shaveha, if you just read it azoi without thinking about it, sounds a little bit more like meloshin shav, returning. But the context is tipadeh, so the contrast to tipadeh, it's probably talking about shivya. Anyway, so the pashtas, it's meloshin shivya. So v'shaveha, those who are captured, and Tashin Rabbim. So what's Taj? Beis Chalalei Alev Sheheim Shvuyim Mamish. So unlike what we said in Tanya, which is not quite Shvuyim, it's Begalus, it needs tipadeh, but here the Beis Chalalei Alev, they are Shvuyim Mamish. Ki merirus sha'isru yeliyas arichukai me'Hashem. That merirus that should have been, like we just said before, the end of Eis Beis, beginning of Eis Gimel, that merirus that should have been about the richuk. Ata napeichu al chesreini ha'olam haza. Like a geschmack, even there's the lashon hakodesh. I have antennas for lines, text that I identify as certain geschmack, the way it's being said, the way it's being written, and I think that those are worth highlighting. And that's usually what speaks to me, what catches me. So ata napechu al chesreinu ha'olam haza, v'chein hasimcha sha'isur uyaliyas min ha'mitzvahs hi metayvus ha'olam haza, v'arei k'shvuyim mamish. And then again, it goes back to this distinction. Tzion is not quite to that extent, etc., etc. But this line, merirus sha'isur uyaliyas arichukai me'Hashem ata napechu al chesreinu ha'olam haza, v'chein hasimcha sha'isur uyaliyas min ha'mitzvahs hi metayvus ha'olam haza, That really caught me, and I think there's actually a very relatable, very relevant, very contemporary take on that. That I don't know if you could say it's directly tied to the Maimer. I think you could argue that it is, but even if it's not, it's definitely a vart that's karev to the tied to the Maimer, in my opinion. So you have this idea here where he's saying that there's something that's sort of, or we're using language of pidyon and shvuyim. Unfortunately today, just to go off on a brief tangent, today we've been reminded of the concept of shvuyim, of hostages, kidnapping, something that in the past seemed more like a musik from the past. We know that there were communities in Italy, maybe elsewhere, that about 500 years ago they had a pidyon shvuyim fund. They literally were on the water, on the seas, and ships were being captured, people were being taken into captivity, including Yidden. And international jury or the local communities, they definitely, it comes up signs Shal Sechuvas, the documented Shal Sechuvas, and say a little bit even in the Sipuri Maisius. I don't know if it comes up in Shivchei Abesh at the beginning about the Baal Shem Tov's father or not, but the Baal Shem Tov's father in Shivchei Abesh at the beginning gets captured and gets sold into slavery. This idea of being captured and sold into slavery was definitely a theme that was familiar, especially the closer you got to the Mediterranean, to Turkey, to Italy. Definitely, or the maybe the Greek islands, was definitely more of a real thing, and or even when when maybe the Turks invaded parts of Europe, parts of Hungary. I think when it describes 500 years ago when there were Rabbanim in Hungary. Back then, and at some point there was I don't have the exact timeline handy, but at some point parts of that area were captured by Turkey. And I think it's described that the Yidden were taken in captivity, or even when the Tatars invaded, or the Kazakhs.
After Khmelnytsky, after Takhtat, there was also a hostage. Or
that's So I'm saying the Kazakhs. I think there's some slavery happening there as well. So there's a long history. Tisha B'av is coming up, and that's one of the themes of Tisha B'av is the shvuyim and the captivity. And that's certainly part of the connection between this pasuk and the Haftarah to this time of year. It's all connected. That's why I said it's relevant even after Parshas Devarim. So the idea of captivity b'chlal used to be a real musik, and then you could say maybe for a period of time it didn't feel like it's such a real concept. Then unfortunately in recent years we were sort of reminded. Obviously it wasn't exactly conventional captivity. You couldn't just be paid to them. Bedamim, or even beyaser b'chdei demeyan, although, right, and that's trying to extract other kinds of concessions. Then you have the question as to whether it's, obviously it's a very, very painful, touchy subject, and ultimately we're happy that whoever was able to get out got out, and that we're not that's not hanging over our heads anymore. At least that's my haragosh about it. But I think it did remind us a bit of what it means to have Jews in captivity. So the pasuk and Alter Rebbe are using this motif, this imagery, and applying it to ourselves inwards to say that we also have musik of kidnapping, hostages, but what's being held hostage? What's being held hostage is something within, which I think is when you tie it in English, it's a very instructive and interesting way of thinking about it. Right? If you want to apply it to yourself, it's what the things within me, or the specific examples that Maimer gives, what within me should be focused on X, and instead it's being taken hostage and focusing on the wrong thing. So specifically, Alter Rebbe is talking here about merirus and simcha. I want to focus specifically on the merirus. And we say merirus to clarify. I think that often when the word merirus comes up in Chassidus, there's like a whole list of words that became very hoiche, like the Polish Yidden say hoiche Sachen, hoiche Yanim. So along with his bailenos and many other words that just sort of become very removed and aloof. And I can even speak for myself. Growing up, it just sounds like it's like a magical thing or a performative thing. Wherever Alter Rebbe says, be merirus, like what exactly? Like you press a button and play the merirus. What exactly does that mean? But I think weiter, sometimes growing up and maturing and having a more mature understanding of these things is to realize that it's like actually not like that kinderish, at least the way I see it, the kinderish way of looking at it. ultimately, merirus in its natural form is being genuinely upset, distressed about some kind of lack, some kind of void, which we all do naturally in one way or another. And even in the Pashat Oifen, Alter Rebbe says it here, merirus mi'ani olam hazeh. It's a very relatable thing. Alter Rebbe is criticizing it, but it's very relatable to say, do we have, so we wouldn't use the word merirus, like if we were using our own vocabulary, even if we were speaking in Hebrew, we wouldn't use the word merirus. It's not part of our contemporary vocabulary. Today we have a word atzbani, atzbanut, nervous. We added more words to our vocabulary. But merirus, in its simple colloquial sense, is seemingly very appropriate for any time a person is really upset and distressed about something. Now, the Alter Rebbe sometimes says you have to be more merirus even if you don't have it. But here we're talking about things that people naturally would have merirus for. So I think it's interesting to point out that in addition to the Pashat Azach, the Maimer says, Ilam Haza, Ilam Haza, today, Achshir Dara, that we've invented. I mean, obviously, I have to speak about this delicately. I'm not being mezalz. I'm not just dismissing it. But we live in a world where we have a whole laundry list of other things that people have merirus about. That's not just their immediate lack, the immediate things that they're lacking, the bills, the etc. But and some would say it's dafka because maybe we don't lack so much in the Yonei Lamaz, or it depends who. But we have the luxury of, instead of being caught up in just wondering what we're going to eat tomorrow, we have more time to luxuriate and have merirus about the other things. So I think that's sort of where my mind took it. So I want to sort of express it a little bit as a critique. I'm not looking to start a beef, as they say in the slang, or I'm not here to take personal shots at anyone, but it did, in my mind, it did sort of, the association that it had for me was that we have a lot of people that have megaphones today, that have people's attention, that are public figures, that are speaking about things that they think are important, that other people think are important. And some of them in particular have more of like a ruchnistic shtel to them, whether they're officially a mashpia or they teach a lot of chassidus, memorim, and sichos, and they have tremendous chos, and the amount of Torah they spread to the public is on a scale that's hard to find precedent for. But at the same time, some of these people we find, everyone knows what I mean, that in addition to talking about the memorim and the sichos, they have their own personal brand of their own personal hang-ups, you could say, or not just speaking for themselves, they're trying to speak about things that are relevant, that are relatable, that other people relate to. So clearly it's relatable, but they're platforming sort of the feelings of angst, or whatever the range of feelings are, whether they're lighter feelings or deeper feelings. Obviously, to some extent, they are real feelings that people are experiencing. I'm not here to dismiss anyone's feelings, the validity of people's feelings. But there's still a question of what we're talking about, what we're focusing on, what we're centering, especially if, like I said, you have a ruchnistic platform. It's important to choose wisely.
What are you platforming? I think that's the question.
Right. So let's take a musig like trauma. Obviously, it's a real thing. We're not here to be Aftalachas just to say that it's all fake. Obviously, there's some. First of all, everything in the world, in my opinion, everything in the world, even the most narish or falsh shazach, usually has a kernel of emes. So it depends how much. Sometimes you just need a bigger limud lekafschos, or you need for taichet a bit more. There's always a kernel of truth everywhere. They say it about the Shpelazed and others, that they would listen to what Stam people on the street were saying, and they would pick up ideas and then say, "Oh, there's an idea here." It's like being mevarnit tzaitzis from the Vel, or taking nigunim, taking snatches of musical notes that they picked up here and turning it into a more heilig azach. The Kedamri Inshi, the Gemara already says Kedamri Inshi takes folk sayings and finds deeper meaning in them. So everything has a meaning to some extent, and not here to reject that. But let's take the matter of trauma. So what percentage of the population has severe trauma that mamish was debilitating and a horrible childhood. I'm sure there's a certain percentage, but it's presumably not. Hopefully not more than 10% of the population. Hopefully not more than 5% of the population. Whatever the number is. So for everyone else, whatever the trauma is, everyone can look back and identify it's something that was hurtful, that bothered them. Maybe something someone said that was really, really upsetting, and it sticks with them. Right? Everyone remembers a random negative moment they had in first grade and in third grade and all the grades. But the question is, though, how important and how central is that to your life, to your narrative about your life, to your inner world, to your spiritual world? And is there a possibility that you're redirecting, you're taking a feeling of discomfort that you have, and you're looking to put words to it, and maybe you're taking a discomfort that could be interpreted in other ways, and you're channeling it in that direction because that's the common template that's out there today. And I was listening. I didn't read the book yet, but there's this book, Letters for Life, or something like that, by Rabbi Levi Shmatkin, that's been published in the last year or so, and he's been making the rounds, different podcasts. So just one vart that I guess maybe I heard from, he was sharing himself, based on what the Rebbe says in different letters. A theme in the Rebbe's letters is that the Rebbe was very often discouraged getting all caught up in these narratives of this happened to me, or this is why I'm stuck. And it's this idea of how, whether or not the Rebbe spells it out 100% like this, or this is an interpretation, but the idea being that, yeah, you could, clearly something happened, clearly something's wrong, clearly something needs to be fixed, something needs to be rectified. But are you telling yourself the right story? Are you telling yourself the right narrative? And is the story and this narrative you're telling yourself, is this actually going to be productive and helpful in getting you out of it? Or is this wrong? And there's so many examples, even in many other contexts. I was hearing totally different contexts, people talking about things from a biological perspective, explaining all kinds of human behaviors and emotions from a biological perspective. So, Mashal der Masber, Rahman al-Islam, if a person loses a child that at a very young age, there's a svara that they're not as misabel as much as if the child had passed away at age that's closer to childbearing age, then it seems like people are misabel more. So the biological explanation for that is that person has a drive to reproduce, and the child was closer to being able to reproduce and to bring your family line into grandchildren, great-grandchildren. So that's the real biological root of why the person is feeling bad. Even those that were saying the svara, but whether or not it's emes or not, but even those that were saying the svara, they were saying, so does that mean that we're delegitimizing that when people are misabel and they don't think of that svara, they're thinking, I miss this person, and this person was so precious to me and so important to me, and we give it an emotional human framework. So is that to say that that's not true? They were saying, no, we're not saying it's not true. It's, however you want to be miyashiv and say that both are true. The point is that there are many ways, there are many lenses through which you can read and interpret the same thing and the same experience and the same feelings. And depending also, I think, on how susceptible a person is to what they're being told, right? Sometimes people will say, person didn't have a taina, let's say, on their parents. And then they went and they spoke to so-and-so, and the person would say, I didn't get it, that it was all your parents' fault. Again, not talking about specific cases, but there's this idea out there that sometimes you can take a person's issue or discomfort or distress and you sort of channel it in a particular direction, a particular story, and digging deeper and deeper in that direction. And maybe it's completely unhelpful. Maybe it's not even true. But even if there is, whether it's a quarter true or half true or 3/4 true, but who says that's the helpful framework? Who says that's the most helpful framework for how to think about it and how to go by trying to rectify it? That's all to say that I think there's a relate.
Sounds like you're referring specifically to people focusing on traumas from much earlier on in their life and sort of trying to understand their past or their present based on sort of through the lenses of those experiences or traumas. Which I guess I'm just, as you're saying this, I'm hearing what you're saying really for the first time, but I think there's also there's an overlapping issue, which I don't think we need to get into, but I just want to, that often people also use the word trauma for things that they're experiencing right now, that's a whole different. I think that's a whole different ballgame.
And certainly any popular idea that's out there probably gets overused and misused, and people could be, weaponization, anything could be misused in multiple, in many ways. We're not getting, it's not my, if we talk about it too much, we're going to be guilty of becoming trauma discussers ourselves. This is all just a dogma. Ani is daiti, and again, I can only speak for myself and not to invalidate, especially if other people are dealing with real serious, more serious matters. But speaking for myself, I'm sure if I wanted, I could make a list of random things that I'm traumatized from, or at least shaped me negatively in some way. But I think from a Chassidic perspective, from a reconsidered perspective, I think the way to look at it is that ultimately, what we want, what we need, our main need, certainly as Yidden, Nefesh Elikis, our main need is Ruchnias, our main need is Elikus. And I think if most of us look back at our childhood, at our upbringing, certainly the way I look back at it, is that I have my you could say my traumas, my tinus, things that I think the learning was nicht wie es darf zu sein. I think the davening, the ruchni, certain things were nicht wie es darf zu sein. And I personally, when I think of childhood traumas, that tends to be where my mind goes, and that's my. And again, is it useful to just dwell on that? It's not really useful to dwell on that either. But I'm just trying to emphasize that even within the framework of trauma, who says the trauma or the trauma that really shaped you or informs you, or what you feel like you're lacking or you feel is wrong, something is discomforting, who's to say that the real issue is this negative thing that this person said, or that maybe it's actually a lack of ruchnius. And there are a lot of merirus. We have merirus that suggest this. There's famous vart. I don't know what the makar is. Doesn't need a makar, but Chazal say every day there's a baskel. Yaitzis marchayrev, mechneses vaymeres. Different baskels that are mo'er the person, b'tshuva. So the shaila is, do we hear the baskel, or whatever exactly the question is? So there's a vart that says that there are people that hear the baskel, and then as a result they become an alcoholic. And on the hopefully today, I don't know if we're better off in this area or not, but we know that the alcoholics are often self-medicating, not to go off into addiction. Now that we started with trauma going into addiction, but we know that those that are alcoholics often are self-medicating. But it ties into the same word. Why is this person self-medicating? We can come and say he's self-medicating because of the trauma. So this word is saying a very interesting thing, very interesting spiritual psychological observation.
You saying that he's self-medicating because of the Seirus Tshuva, which is being taken.
Yeah, so there was a Seirus Tshuva, there's a baskel. He feels that something's wrong. Zachen are nicht wie sie darf zu sein, but it's very incoherent. It's not. It isn't articulated clearly. So, in order to channel the baskel, you'd have to stop to listen to the baskel and stop to reflect. And think about one's past and one's present and one's matzav. But instead, they just their antenna picks up this discomfort, and they've already established that when they feel that way, so they self-medicate with the alcohol. So that's this vart that they hear the baskel, but it just gets channeled into that. I think there's another version of it where it's like almost like a punishment, where like that's the punishment milamaila that. It says sometimes in Chazal that they take away a person's ability to do tshuva. Or there's another story where I'm forgetting the exact story, but there's a story where from the time of the Baal Shem Tov, where the person becomes an extreme alcoholic, and it's like an exer min hashamayim to prevent him from accessing something or tapping into something. So this is a very interesting idea about, for those that are interested in the topic of addiction, a very interesting spiritual perspective that ties into the same point, which is that according to our beliefs, our tzugang, our hashkafa, our central needs Unlike maybe, I looked it up just before, in the Welt is a famous musig of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the idea is that you have to start from the basic needs, and then you can work your way up to the more abstract needs. And so Lafizeh, maybe Elikos is the most abstract need. It's at the top of the pyramid. But that's not our hashkaf, that's not our how we look at it, but rather the opposite. And maybe this ties into, I'm not an expert on this by any means, but this taps into the whole new Frankel about meaning as a very essential need for the human. So I think Maslow puts it all the way at the top. Self-actualization, meaning, these are the more abstract ones. But our tzugain, obviously if a person is starving, you kind of tie this on a person who's starving, they have to feed themselves. But there's obviously many dargas and layers. How much food do you need to feed yourself, etc., to make sure you're not starving? Second, you're not starving. The main need that a person has, even more than the Bani Chayim Mezayni, the way the Maimer is saying it here, is this spiritual connection, this spiritual actualization. Not to say self-actualization, because then we run into bittul. Is it the self? Is it not the self? But we're going to just say, spiritual actualization. So, lafi our hashkaf, lafi our havana. That's the main need that a person has. So now let's look back. Like I said, for me, it's more conscious. For me, that's the first thing I think of when I think back. That's how I'm built. For other people, maybe it's not the first thing they think about. But maybe if you went to a therapist that deals in Yoni Ruchnius, maybe you would realize that actually you feel that similar, that you feel that the learning when you were younger was nicht darf. It didn't inspire you on a life long, a life full of learning. And maybe it ties into what we said before about the learning isn't being done right, it's not being given, the material isn't being given in the proper way. It could all be connected. We can tie all the threads together. But
You're saying,
maybe you look back in your childhood and you're like, you know what? I went to a shul and the davening there wasn't shvisa darf design, and I didn't see anyone. I wasn't around, and I wasn't in an environment, or I'm still not in an environment where people daven like a bench. And maybe every time you participate in a minyan, you're in a show where people are not davening like a bench. Maybe that's wounding you, and you don't realize it. And then after you feel spiritually unsatisfied from the davening, so then you go to the kiddush and you soak your sorrows in alcohol. But it's the same path, the same route of feeling like something's missing, like something's lacking, and maybe that was what was missing, what was lacking all along. Again, I can't speak for everyone. I'm not here to project and to tell people as a fact that this is your story. But I think if a lot of people took this, considered this, and try to see whether this applies, I wouldn't be surprised if a larger number of people would relate in some way, and it would resonate with them, or as people now missay it today, they would resonate with it. But I think there's something there that we could stand to pay attention to think about. So I think this line, like I said, is it the Taich of the Maimer, or is this like where we came to? I think it is the Taich of the Maimer if it's applied to today's world, where people clearly are spending a lot more time having merirus defined as distress. If you're going to a therapist, if you're talking about it on a podcast, clearly that definitely rises to the level of merirus. And seemingly for many people rises above their merirus about their chesrein elamaza, meaning the fact that they, people want to have a nicer kitchen, or they want to have a bungalow, or this or that. People are bothered by that as well. But in today's world, it seems like people tend to be more bothered in many cases by these traumas and all the things that belong to that category. So when we speak about hostage and being taken, being kidnapped and taken hostage and taken in the wrong direction, I think the more obvious example of this in today's day and age is actually this, that the merirus shayis really is rechukim Hashem. And again, you say it like in the fancy language, merirus rechukim Hashem. How many of us are gonna? How distant I am from Hashem? It's very romanticized, or the way, or even if the way it was, a few generations ago, was taka on a much deeper, more profound level. Like I said, it doesn't have to be in such a profound level. I think we have a basic spiritual needs. Maybe we're very pashto people. Maybe we're sukkah stavan hanefelas. Maybe we're ipus of the Mashiach. Maybe we don't have such profound feelings about chukim Hashem. But like I said, on a pashto level, person should have merirus. That again, merirus meaning that if the learning and the davening and the Yiddish environment is not via darf Tzion, and you're a normal Yid, an ehrliche Yid, that should bother you. Not just should as in like I'm lecturing you and telling you what should bother you, but like I think it would be, like I said, it would be a very relatable thing that people would say, you know what, it actually does bother me. I never thought about it, or I push it to the side, or I medicate it, but it actually does bother me that I'm not in the right spiritual environment. I'd love to be in a more wholesome spiritual environment. So that would be on a very passionate level. That would be the merirus that things are nicht to be darf sein, and that discomfort is then taken hostage and hijacked and channeled into chesrei olam hazeh, but like this version of chesrei olam hazeh that I'm upset about the relationships, and I'm upset about the trauma, and I'm upset about my the interactions I have with other people, make me uncomfortable, whatever the things that different people are talking about. And again, I'm sure they're real to some extent, and they're relatable to some extent, but as humans, as Yidden, as Chassidim, as spiritual people, is it even honorable and respectable to be talking about such things, or is it like literally hijacking the feelings, hijacking the time, hijacking the space, the platform that we have, and channeling? So that's shivya, that's shvuyim mamish. You need to do pidyon shvuyim, GoFundMe, but instead of donations of dollars, donations of minutes, donations of time to try to think about which spiritual parts of ourselves are b'shivya, are k'shvuyim mamish, are hijacked. Like I said, it doesn't have to be merirus on the nth madrega, and the rechukim Hashem doesn't have to be in the nth madrega, and the chesrei olam hazeh doesn't have to literally be bani chayim mezayne. But I think, in my opinion, this is more or less the taich and the mimer as it's reapplied to the world and the environment that we live in today.
I just wanted to say a couple of thoughts that come to me as you're saying this. First of all, the anecdotes that you shared about the result of the Baskoil being Shikrus, or the Baal Shem Tov, the story of the Shukra Baal Shem Tov. Maybe I'm misremembering something, but certainly that story of the Baskoil you mentioned is not something I recall, and maybe it would be nice if we could find a marker for it and put the link in the show's notes, as the Lashon goes these days. But also, you're basically the argument or the perspective that you're suggesting is that when a person has trauma or whatever other major feelings it can be seen through the perspective of what ruchnius t'kenyanim is he or was he lacking that bring about that feeling. And if he had experienced a true relationship with the Eibishter, so to speak, or closeness or spiritual feelings, then how his teacher or parent mistreated him wouldn't have had the same impact. I think that's along basically what you're suggesting. And I just want to add, first of all, that there's a lot of food for thought, in our own personal avodah, but also it comes to mind that I just brought it up here on my screen from Tanya Perek Lamed Aleph, where the Alter Rebbe talks about atzvus b'milud d'shmaya. So the lashon over there is achshas hakosher shishoam yuchedes v'ru'il kach l'rev b'nei adam hi b'shar shu atziv b'lav hachim b'milud d'alma oy kach b'li shum sibba, which is just rereading this now, like how often do we find ourselves? Yeah, whatever. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling whatever. Like, why? So the way so first of all, that's another perspective that can be placed over here, is that, I'm feeling I have all this grief about whatever it is in my past that didn't go. Can I rechannel that grief to be about, coming to can I rechannel the grief or the trauma, whatever it is, to that, right? So that seems to be what Alter Rebbe is saying here in Perek Lamed Aleph, but and maybe it's been said already, that what you're saying is also Pshat in Perek Lamed Aleph, that it's not just, oh, I happen to be sad now, so I'm going to channel that sadness towards Milad Ishmaya, but Bissel Tifer, that's Taka the Pshat, that yes, Chitzonius, the reason you're sad is for whatever reason, or it's Belishum Sibba. But if you go a bit deeper, as the treffen, that's Taka, the reason why you're sad is Taka because of the Basker that Yetzis Mahachirev.
Right. So there, I think would be even more of just the vort, meaning it's hard to touch it directly into Tanya. But even there, we see this relationship of how feelings can be is transmutable. A word they can be redirected, and they're more fluid. Huh?
To an extent.
Yeah, that they're more fluid than we realize and than we recognize, and there probably are many examples of this in everyday life where a person's angry about one thing and then somehow something triggers them and it gets like totally redirected onto something else. I mean, let's say, speaking of trauma, let's say there are parents that are really upset about something entirely different, and then the kid says something, it does something that triggers them, and they let it all out on the kid, and then that kid will grow up and he'll have trauma. So that's an example where clearly things can get redirected on a dime in these kinds of ways, even if there's no direct connection. Which maybe is the Tanya, where not often there's even a direct connection, but we see how adjacent these feelings are to each other. But my Taich here, which again, even here, you can debate whether that's mamish the pshat, but it certainly can be read very easily into the words, into the text. The idea of shvuyim, of hostage, of hijacking. When you speak of a hostage and hijacking, it's like literally something that was like this thing that was supposed to be here ended up there. So it resonates with me to say that it's like
the point I was going to say, that we've spoken in the past, maybe a topic for a future recording, about the whole notion of hispanos and how hispanos is inherently a very mukhshistic experience, and how nowadays we may struggle having a mukhshistic experience when we're talking about malachim or spiritual things, and how that might have been different for Chassidim in the earlier Dodos. But I think Dafka, the sad reality that you started out with at the beginning of, we all have in our mind images of relating to hostage and fakeret, like that, right? That the Alter Rebbe is trying to I mean, in a respectful way, play on those emotions. Like, yeah, you know what pidyon shvuyim is, you know what hostage is, and now use that imagery to think of yourself when you're stuck in merirus of chesaron and elam hazeh, and when you're screaming to get out of that, and to have your merirus from the chesaron and the chukay me'ashem yisparach, I think was the lashon.
100%. All imagery is meant to be visualized in some way. So if the Alter Rebbe is teaching it into the pasuk and into V'shavah and into shvuyim mamish, my pashat havana is that that visualization and that imagery is important and useful and relevant, and it should be part of the person's inner process. And by the way, I have I don't think we have the time for it, but I easily have half an hour of material of pidyon shvuyim and of shvuyim by Alter Rebbe. I have letters from Alter Rebbe, very interestingly, about cases of pidyon shvuyim. If you look in the imagery of Alter Rebbe, I'm not going to get into it now, but there's a whole parsha in the imagery of Alter Rebbe of how there was a community Yidden that ended up in some situation with the government. And the Alter Rebbe, we know from we started Igeres HaKodesh, how many times the Alter Rebbe pumped the Chassidim for money, for fundraising. It was relentless in the fundraising for Eretz Yisrael and then fundraising for additional things. So there are letters. I don't recall at the moment that any of them made it into Igeres HaKodesh. If they did, I'm just momentarily completely forgetting. But certainly in Igeres of the Alter Rebbe, there's a whole zach about raising money, and the term pidyon shvuyim is used multiple times. I think there's even some of the letters there, some of the documentation there is written, as they say, behasva'a, where sort of code words, because the government wasn't supposed to know. It wasn't even in Hebrew. That you didn't want the government to be able to. If someone mastered you, you didn't want the documents to be able to give you away, to betray you. But there were powers. We talk about the early tzaddikim, Moshe Leib Sasev, and others of how the Isaac and pidyon shvuyim. By the way, that's a big part of the early Doidos Chassidus is the pritzim in Poland and the throwing Yidden in the dungeon and pidyon shvuyim in that sense as well. So it's interesting that the Alter Rebbe had his version in Russia. Part of the Alter Rebbe is a whole entirely different subject. It's how the Alter Rebbe seemed to prefer the Russian bureaucracy over the Wild West of the pritzim in Poland. But even in the wonderful liberating empire of the Russian Empire, there clearly still were tzaddis, and they started kicking in already Bisman of Alter Rebbe. And you see how the Alter Rebbe is reacting. So the pidyon shvuyim, instead of the pidyon shvuyim being a maisa with Sipuri Tzadikim, a Malka maisa, so we don't necessarily have that from the Alter Rebbe. Although there is a famous story whether or not it's in the Machanayim, the three Tzadikim are collected together for pidyon shvuyim, and there's the miser with the penny. Whether or not that's a real story or where that comes from, but that is a story that there are stories. But even putting that aside, I
think the stories of other Chassidim, maybe Rabbi Parish or Isaac Homler for pidyon shvuyim, I think, no?
Mm-hmm.
There's a miser with there's a miser with I think with Reb Chaim Volozhiner and one of the Chassidim who would they supported. You have to ask Shmuel Super. There's a Psamaisa there that they support. They were doing pidyon shvuyim together.
There's also the Alter Rebbe on the night of Yom Kippur story, which itself has a very. I remember trying to track that story down, where it comes from, what the mucker is, a little shvach. But whatever, the point isn't right now whether the story happened exactly as it's told, but just the theme of pidyon shvuyim in Chassidus Shemaisis is a strong one. But so it's interesting how now by the Alter Rebbe, whether or not we have a lot of pidyon shvuyim maisis, but there actually are pidyon shvuyim documents where the Alter Rebbe was very directly involved in cases of raising money to get Yidden out of a tzara. There's also an interesting mimer trade of the Alter Rebbe that I came across also this past Friday. In the Hanachas of Pinchas Rezes, the last one in the Sefer of an Iksayach Tzedakah, Alter Rebbe says there an interesting part, and it probably is connected to the Alter Rebbe said it in Barditchev in Tovkov Ayin. Alter Rebbe traveled to Ukraine in Tovkov Ayin, also a shtickle pidyon shvuyim-esque situation at the time. I'm not going to get into that either. But in this mimer, in this Torah, which clearly seems related to that, it starts off with this lashon of an Iksayach Tzedakah, which reminds me a little bit of Vishavah Tzedakah. It's a different pasuk in Yeshaya. It's a haftarah for Kisavai. V'niksayach tzedakah. So v'niksayach, negus is someone that comes to collect money and not in a pleasant way. So what's v'niksayach tzedakah? There the Alter Rebbe says that our whole interaction with the world, the nitzotzes, it's a more of a delicate dance. We don't talk about the klippus and the sitra achra so much as this visceral thing, the way you see it in earlier merirus, but the Alter Rebbe does do that more. And in a number of places, when it talks about being mevayer and nitzotzes, there's this idea of how you also have to give them their piece. You have to give them their shtick. You can't just take and be maila and not give them anything in return. There the Alter Rebbe says the fact that we keep on finding ourselves in situations where we have to give money to the authorities, very interesting lashon there, says that itself is a gather of pidyon shvuyim. Whether or not he is connecting it to real world pidyon shvuyim, or whether even if it's just a tax or whatever it is, that another reason why we have to give our hard-earned money away to the authorities. He says that's v'niksayach tzedakah, that the niksayach, they take our money, that itself is a pidyon shvuyim. We're being paid the nitzotzes from Galus, and in exchange we have to give whatever we have to give, which is a very interesting idea, and I feel like it fits into the picture somewhere here. But even back to our mimer here, without, as time went on, we don't focus on the sitra achra. We're not battling the sitra achra so consciously and so vividly. You see it in Tanya, though. Often the concept of merirus is to sort of attack the sitra achra in oneself, and that itself is a delicate thing. And we know from merirus that you have to be careful. Not even the Gemara, it says you shouldn't say gira be'ena desitna. You don't want to mess directly with the negative forces, the negative energy. But without getting into all of that, that is a component here as well. and without, if we sort of, again, sort of turn inwards and speak of the negative energy within ourselves, maybe we can put it as, are we feeding the negative energy in a good way or in a bad way? Obviously, there's, like Alter Rebbe says, in Iksayach Tzaka, sometimes it seems like you do have to feed the forces negativity in some way in order to retrieve the good, in order to rescue the good. But on the other hand, obviously, just to feed the forces of negativity, to feed the negative energy, stamazai without a cheshbon, obviously is bad, and that's not pidyon shvuyim. So I think the themes and the ideas are interrelated and interconnected in some way. And like I said, it came up, so I was looking pidyon shvuyim with Alter Rebbe. What is Alter Rebbe? What else does Alter Rebbe have to say about shvuyim and pidyon shvuyim? So, like I said, there's the whole history of pidyon shvuyim, and then there's this interesting title of Alter Rebbe that maybe needs to be, maybe on another occasion we can delve more deeply into it directly. But it's all related in one way or another. But like you said, the idea of shvuyim is, if there's an imagery here, then we have to figure out how to apply that imagery to ourselves. And like we said, unfortunately, it's a bit fresh in our minds, and it's still in the news. It comes up. This one gets interviewed a couple years later, and each one comes out and shares a new prat and a new teher, and whether or not we need to read every single one or not, I don't know. But if if the Bashkacha Pratis we read it, so there should be some hayron of Hashem. So this is the key. This is, like I said, look at Chassidus. This is not an idea that's actually repeated a lot. And even when the Rebbe talks about the mimer, he doesn't tend to focus on this detail. He tends to focus on other details. Although this detail is definitely cited in the mimer from Tafshin. The Rebbe definitely repeats it, and the Rebbe repeats it and puts it in his own mouth when he chazes the mimer. It's just, like I said, just not the part where the Rebbe necessarily adds in an obvious way any obvious ha'aris. The Rebbe is commenting on other things, but it's central to the structure of the mimer. It's central to the point of the mimer. So therefore, it's I think very important to call attention to this line, to this passage, to this idea, which, like I said, seems it definitely resonated with me, and I think it's relevant to me, to us. I think hopefully other people will also find it helpful and relevant. Any final ha'aris?
No, and the fake clock that we're subjected to in Chicago with the stroke.
Now it's the real chatzos on the fake clock.
Yeah.
Okay, we won't say more about what time it is, but yeah, all right, fine. Good Nacht, and we'll see you all hopefully soon.